Brett Harper. I have firsthand knowledge. I'm a survivor of a abusive boarding school for troubled teens, and so that's kind of how I got into advocating for better conditions for these places to be shut down or investigated, because I have lifelong injuries and ailments from it, and so there's lots of these places. There's literally hundreds of these places, if not thousands. A lot of them are black sites, so they're not even registered with the, if it's a boarding school, they're not registered with the Board of Education in their state, or if it's a wilderness program, sometimes they're not registered with the state at all, or if it's like a boys or girls home, those aren't often regulated very well. So these places are able to, people send their kids there, and they're able to get away with murder, literally in some cases. And so they can get away with a lot of things. And so that's why there's a lot of survivors or advocates for against these places. And it really depends on the state, and that's why there's these so-called shelter states like Utah, Missouri, Florida, places that are more red states. Conservative states tend to be more sheltering of these types of religious schools that we get away with, or ones that claim to be religious can get through the loopholes. And then the states vary too. Like some of these programs are state run, and it just depends on the state how well they run their programs. Some of these places are places that judges send people to, and those are more likely to be inspected. But that's not always the case. There are rules and laws, obviously, against child abuse and child labor, and it just depends on the state and whether they enforce them or not. Betsy DeVos is very connected. Our current Secretary of Education, she has ties with some of these Christian institutions, adoption companies, boarding schools, private schools. And I can already see what she's trying to do, especially with this COVID thing. She's trying to make the voucher program that she's wanted to have succeed, get through Congress, where you can take taxpayer funds and you can go to a private school instead of sending your kid to a public one. And that would open the floodgates to some of these like abusive boarding schools being used as basically a cop-out to parenting to people that don't want to be a parent, or maybe they just, don't they think it would be good for their kid, whatever, but then it would open the floodgates for them. So it's definitely like connected, like people know each other, especially the religious ones. The non-religious ones through the state or whatever, of course, they've got the state on their side. So that's, they can kind of get away with stuff without investigating themselves, essentially. There's a lot of corruption. I don't think that parental awareness alone would solve the issue, because I hate to say it, but there are parents that would rather send their kids away than deal with them. And there's also parents that, even if they hear whatever is going on, they don't choose to believe it. My dad runs a transport agency, actually still taking kids to these places. So some people are just stuck in their ways, and you're never going to convince them. I think it's absolutely imperative that the government step in these cases. I think I was in the wrong place, yeah. And so I wish I would have got sent to something like that. I think that some of these places mean well, and some of the people convince themselves that what they're doing is good. You know what I mean? But I think that some of them are just misguided, or stubborn, and don't want to listen, or don't have any guidance because there's no real regulation over them. So yeah, I wish the government would have regulated better, like places like this, so that something like this wouldn't have existed. I actually have I don't know if you're going to ask me about this later, but I actually have PTSD, major depressive disorder, and sciatica. So I have problems with my leg and my lower spine, my back. I had surgery on it. I had a laminectomy, discectomy, some back surgery. I'm still recovering. I'm in pain like all the time. So yeah, I definitely think that these places are dangerous, and I wish that the government would have stepped in so that I wouldn't have to be in pain every day for the rest of my life. Nightmares are very common when I talk to former students, survivors. Nightmares and PTSD, anxiety, a lot of depression. So what it needs to happen is we need a national law. We need something. So like boarding school started in Washington, and then they got shut down because they exposed kids to asbestos, right? And some of those kids, I've been talking to them, they're years later, they have health problems. It could be related to that, like asthma, you know what I mean? One was getting a test for lung cancer at one point. So that's scary, right? Like these kids grew up and were exposed to this. They were in their care. So they moved to California after the state should have been in Washington. And they were sued. And I guess apparently because they thought they were going to get sued some more, they had some legal, basically some legal vulnerability. They moved to from Stockton, California to Stockton, Missouri. So if we don't have a national law in place to fix this, and say the local or states are the only ones doing this, then some place could just move to Utah or Florida or Missouri or wherever, whatever shelters, right? So it is absolutely imperative that we get something done at the higher levels, maybe in Congress or as a national effort at some point, to say, look, if you're going to run a school, you have to have licensed teachers, you got to have licensed psychiatrists if you're going to be dealing with people that are troubled. You need to have, like mental health needs to be a thing, and you need to have people access to doctors. You need to have certain nutrition, balanced diet. You can't exploit them for work, like that all the time. And, and you need to, we'll have to check up on you every once in a while, make sure kids are doing okay. Yeah. And that's really a bare minimum, I think, of what we should expect. I mean, public schools are no different, right? They have rules, regulations, oversight, right? I get that a lot of these private institutions want to avoid that because they're private, but they need to have some kind of checks and balances, and the state-run ones, they need to be looked into too as well, because obviously the only person that can change that is the actual state. I grew up Christian. Obviously, I was in a Christian school, and I found that a lot of times, in my opinion, sometimes the Bible is taken wrong. And when I read that verse, that's not really what I saw in that. And maybe it's just me. I like to believe in a more compassionate God that's not as beat him with a rod. Listen to me. You know what I mean? Like I just don't see, I don't understand. Like, you don't do that to your cat or your dog. Why would some benevolent God do that? Now, of course, maybe I'm wrong, right? But when I read "spare the rod," I think of use it sparingly. Maybe not even. It may not even be. It may be figurative too. Whatever the case may be, abuse is still abuse. Neglect is still neglect, and a lot of these people. Some of these people may not even be in talking to some of these former staff, right? And former staff, like this former staff daughter, householder's daughter. I've been talking to her, and she also confirmed this, and that is that when we're dealing with the staff there, a lot of them think they're doing a good thing, and they're just taking orders, right? So they're taking orders. They would recruit students that came out of their program. So this kid is vulnerable, feeling like they're worthless, like they messed up their whole life, and they just graduated school, and now they're given an opportunity to school or the institution and take orders, and then just kind of fall in line. And some of them later leave those institutions, right? And then they say, oh my God, I don't know what I got into. I went to school there. I thought I was helping. And then I realized one day that this wasn't right, and I left. So I had to come clean about it. So I definitely think that there's a lot of that kind of taking marching orders. A lot of them don't know what to do. they want to maybe do something. Some of them feel like there isn't anything they can do.
Yeah.
Definitely feel like there's a lot. They feel like the system's too big, too powerful. There's too many protections for people like that. But yeah, I mean, definitely, I think most people want to try this. A few people are like, oh, well, those kids screwed up, whatever, they deserve it.
Yeah.
And those are usually the kinds of people that send their kids there. Mm-hmm. So the troubled teen industry, the messaging really depends, I guess. It's all kind of similar, I guess, private and religious. The message is send your kid here and we'll fix them, through tough love and discipline and whatever. And I guess, like, what I would say about, of course, families that are, like, that have, like, the parents can't get along with the teen. That's pretty normal, right? Like, that happens. Like, and I think that a lot of parents that send their kid off to these places, they just take more time to parent their kids and, like, connect with their kids, then maybe they wouldn't be as susceptible to these people's deceptive marketing techniques.
Yeah.
And they would realize that, and if they realize how harmful and traumatic it can be and lifelong it can be and how it can hurt the relationship, I think that they wouldn't. Well, I definitely think that people need to look into some of the stuff that we're doing with Spare the Rod and the Troubled Teens Reddit, and just kind of read it themselves. Like, there's a lot of information that we put out. We'll be putting out a lot of testimonies. I'm going to continue to kind of pop them up there in the Troubled Teens Reddit as well. Mainly what I would say is look into the effects of this mentally and physically on these students as you're reading through the thread or as you're reading these testimonies. And, it's easy for some parents to dismiss it and say, oh, well, this is just a disgruntled student. But when you start to see hundreds and hundreds or thousands of disgruntled students all saying the same thing, I have nightmares, I have, night terrors, I have my PTSD that I got diagnosed with, or I'm in chronic pain because I broke my leg and it never properly healed, and, or whatever the case may be, right?
Yeah.
And so I really just hope that parents look into this before they send their kids there. The doctors look into this, psychiatrists look into this, and that we're able to get some attention from some people like Adam Schiff again, like he did have a thing, and get some kind of national and local changes to law. I would say if people really want to get involved, one of the best ways that they can do that is to go to there's a directory on the Reddit, on the Troubled Teens Reddit, that tells you how to look up your representatives. You can also just Google that. Write your representatives. It takes a little bit of time. I know there's a lot of them, in the state, but if you write all the state reps in the House and Senate with an email and just kind of change the name, copy paste, that makes a big difference. That'll get the conversation going. Maybe write your governor's advocacy office, your DA's office. If there's a place in a local city or town next to you, or some place that you know of that's abusing children, call up the local VA or child services, write them, and just really talk to these students. Like, if you're a counselor or somebody that's a fellow survivor, sometimes just talking to these kids, like, or young adults after they get out of these places, it could be the difference between life and death. Like, literally could keep them from committing suicide or doing something and get them locked up for life because they're just upset and they're just torn up and destroyed by what's happened to them. So there's a lot of healing that needs to happen too.